Hi, I'm Andy Wible, and welcome to Timely Topics. Today we're going to be talking to Carolyne Waterstradt. That's the person I bought my house off of, actually, so I have a close connection, but she's just written a book, and she's here to talk about it. So please welcome Carolyne. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for inviting me, Andy.
Yeah, your book's called Fighting the Good Fight, and what's the fight? Tell us about your book.
My book is based on research I did when I was getting my master's of social work degree, where I interviewed 18 women who had been sexually assaulted by a member of the clergy. Okay. And I did an unstructured interview where I just asked them, how did you heal from that? And let them talk. I recorded their interviews. They were all by phone. Everyone lived out of state.
I see.
One woman lived in the Middle East. And
wow.
Yeah, she was very interesting.
Yeah.
And so I just recorded their story about what happened after the assault became public.
And so why did you write the book? To give views of what has happened, or is it to try to talk about the healing of that?
Well, it's to talk about the healing of it, and there's a couple reasons I wrote the book. One is I'm a survivor of that kind of assault, and the research and the books that have been written have all been the grooming process or what's going on with the perpetrator, but nothing about what happens afterwards.
I see.
And so I wanted to address what happens after, how people heal, and how people can help them heal.
Interesting, interesting. How'd you find these 18 people?
It was a really interesting process. I went through Grand Valley's IRB process where they
IRB means as an institutional research board?
Yes,
or?
Yeah, review board.
Yeah, okay.
And they approved the research as ethical and then made that allowed me to publish it when it was done. So I went through them and then sent out information to different advocacy groups that I was interviewing women who had been assaulted after turning 18. And it went viral because one day I did a Google search of my name and I pulled up my call for participants, and it was in languages I've never seen.
Wow.
So I did Google Translate, and there were Eastern European languages and some that I'd never even heard of.
And so you got feedback, and then of probably more than 18, and then how did you pick the ones that you went with?
Well, in order to be considered for the study, they had to have been abused after they turned 18, so that disqualified all the childhood sexual abuse. They had to be abused by a clergy person with a master's degree or its equivalent, and they couldn't be involved in a legal lawsuit that was open because we didn't want the research subpoenaed. I
see. And so why the restriction on master's degree?
Because we wanted to make sure, because sometimes people call themselves clergy and they have no training.
I see.
So we wanted to make sure they had training and a lot of training, and to see if these people with these master's degrees were behaving unethically. In fact, one had a PhD in ethics.
Wow.
And
so this might be a weird question, but I suspect it's not, given you've written a book, but what does clergy sexual abuse look like? I mean, what type of actions are we
I'm glad you asked that question, because a lot of people will say, oh, it was a mutual thing, they're two consenting adults, but they're not. Anytime a clergy person has a relationship with anybody in his congregation who isn't his or her spouse or his or her partner, it's abuse, because there's it's an abuse of power. People don't expect that their clergy are going to grope them or do anything else like that. So the clergy person holds all the abuse or all the power, and what he or she does is they look for somebody who's vulnerable, who's coming to them for counseling or mentoring, and then they start a period of grooming. And that process of grooming it can include many different things. Some of it is, nobody understands you like I do. And they start to isolate them from people. They may invite the person out for some type of outing, like let's say they're talking about depression and there's a workshop on depression, let's go to it. And so the victim is thinking this is legit because this is the authority, the moral authority in the congregation, where he knows it's not. And he's breaking down the boundaries. Okay.
And so it seems a little different than what we think about with like pedophile priests or things like that, because it is adults. But is it consensual? I mean, even though there is this power.
No, and the reason why it's not consensual is because it's an abuse of power where the clergy person, it's like a teacher and a student, or
Okay,
a
so it's like if I dated someone in my class, that's a
Right.
no-no.
Yeah, it's a no-no, and it's the same kind of principle, or a doctor and a patient, a therapist and their client.
Okay.
Because the person has made themselves vulnerable, and they're trying to be helped by this spiritual advisor.
Right.
And the advisor isn't helping. Like one thing that grooming consists of is you go in with a problem, and the clergy person will make it huge and throw you into a crisis. And the clergy person may trip and grab you inappropriately, but then you chalk it up to, or the victim chalks it up to the fact that, oh, he really slipped. Where another person, they wouldn't, they would say, what a creep.
Right, right. Huh. So there's often the person, this is someone who's looked up to, and so you view them differently than you would another person.
Right. Because they're the authority in the congregation. And so
Sure.
then once they go in and make the relationship sexual, what they will say to the victim is, either you asked for that, or no one's going to believe you. And they also paint the picture of the victim in the congregation as someone who's crazy.
Crazy, or maybe the instigator.
Or the instigator.
Yeah. I wonder, could what if I'm a single clergy person, and should I just not date anyone in my congregation?
No. Well, you don't date in your congregation, and a lot of congregations have really strict rules. If you're single and you want to date someone, either you go to a different congregation or that person goes to a different congregation. But you can't be a pastor or a rabbi and be dating somebody because they're not seeing you clearly.
So I might say, I'd really like to ask you out on a date, but I can't. Would you mind joining another church, or something like that?
Something like that, and also go to the authority, the hierarchy, and say, this is what's going on, and be legit. What happens in these predator situations is it's all a secret. You can't tell anybody this. And so it's not a legit situation.
Well, I remember I had a sociology professor who was a priest, Catholic priest.
Okay.
And he decided he didn't want to be a Catholic priest anymore, partially because he was attracted to women and wanted to do that. And he ended up marrying a woman that was in his congregation or under him. And she had 12 kids, and he's like, I had an instant family. She was a widow.
Okay.
And so would that have been sexual abuse?
Well, there's cases, there are exceptions. In a case like that where he's making it legit.
Yeah. But I guess he did also say, I'm getting away from my job in the church before that.
Yeah, he did what he needed to do to make that right. A lot of times they're not doing that. They're predators. They have more than one victim. They know what they're doing.
Yeah, right. So if someone has been a victim of clergy sexual assault, is that something that is necessarily illegal, that you would go to?
That is such a good question, because in 11 states it is either a misdemeanor or a felony. In the state of Michigan in 1995, State Representative John Jalema introduced legislation to the Congress that it's called the Mental Health Sexual Assault Bill, and that any mental health professional who has a sexual relationship with his or her client has committed criminal sexual misconduct.
I see.
And then they can be charged criminally and put on the sexual offender list. But what happened is that bill passed readily in the Congress. When it went to the Senate and it was in the committee in the Senate, the clergy found out about it in the state, and they raised a ruckus. And
because it would apply to them.
Because it would apply to them, and John Jalema said they were from all quarters, all different denominations, and they came forward and they're like, you got to take this off of there. We monitor our own. And so the people on the committee said, we need to strike clergy from this bill, or it's not going to pass. And they struck clergy from the mental health bill. So now it's illegal in the state of Michigan for a therapist or a social worker or doctor or nurse to have a relationship, but it's not illegal for clergy.
Interesting. Even though they would consider themselves often mental health professionals.
Yeah, because they do counseling.
Right. Wow.
But it's rampant. One study shows 39% of clergy act inappropriately.
Wow.
And I didn't believe that study when I first came across it and read it. But the more I talk about this and the more I do this, I'll be darned if in most groups there's not at least one, if not two people who say that happened to me.
Wow. Wow. So if you're in Michigan and you can't go to the police, who would you talk to?
What
or who should
people
you talk
usually do is they'll go to the denomination,
mm-hmm.
and they'll say, this happened to me.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times denominations will remove that clergy person from the congregation, but not always. In my book, all the women were removed from their congregation, but not all the clergy were. All the women who had careers in
removed by themselves or by?
Some by themselves, but usually it was because of the shaming
Wow.
that took place. They would get hate
So it's
mail
their
or-
problem, not the clergy person.
Right, they were blamed for it. And then the clergy did not all lose their jobs.
Hmm.
All the women who had careers in the church all lost their careers.
I see. So we've heard a lot in the news about this in terms of Catholic priests being moved to other areas and not really solving the problem or alerting people that it was going on. So, and this is not a Catholic-only problem.
No, it's not. And even in the Catholic Church, it's estimated that more women are sexually assaulted than children.
Yeah.
And girls are also sexually assaulted, but you hear about the boys,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just really
Because it's more a news story or
Yeah.
alarming to people or something.
Yeah.
Interesting. So you interviewed 18 people?
18.
And did they have similar stories of how they handled it?
They only 2 didn't come forward to the authorities. And when I say the authorities, I mean the denomination or the congregation. But all the rest did, and they were hurt really bad by the people in the church. My studies
By coming forward?
by coming forward. But those who didn't come forward were also hurt because they held this secret for so long.
Mm-hmm.
What I did find is the women who found another congregation to heal in moved forward in their faith. Those who never did found either something else meaningful in their life or are stuck.
Huh. So so coming forward helped them, but yet it was problematic as well. I
It
guess.
did help, but it
Initially it wasn't.
initially it hurt. The women who were assaulted, most of them suffered from PTSD.
Sure.
And so when a congregation then turned its back on the woman, their symptoms were aggravated of post-traumatic stress.
Mm-hmm.
And the worse collusion in the church, the more severe the PTSD was.
Huh. And does it matter, or did you find any differences among denominations that some had more abuse than others, or
No, I didn't
religions?
have a big enough sample to show that, but it didn't matter. It could be the most liberal congregation or the most conservative congregation. Nobody wants to hear about it.
I see. So it doesn't matter if you're Unitarian or Catholic or...
No, and I even have a Unitarian in the book, and
Really?
she had a really, really hard time.
Yeah, interesting. So did you look at different religions, or was it...
There's 3 religions represented. Most are Christian because our country is mostly Christian. 1 Jewish woman, 1 Unitarian, and then the Arab woman in the Middle East, she was originally Muslim but had converted to Christianity.
I
and
see.
she was abused by a Catholic priest.
Interesting. But had not had any issue when she was Islamic, correct?
No, but she said many of the women do.
But it is common nonetheless.
Yeah, it's very common.
Huh. So what, I know we have here at the school, we have sexual harassment training, we have various workshops and what to make sure that we do things ethically with our students and don't break laws and whatnot. Are clergy members trained? You said they have master's degree. Is that part of their training to know where they can?
Yeah, it's part of some trainings, but there's so many denominations, it's hard to say that they all get that training.
I see.
And what's really interesting is some of the training that is done, and some of the people who are very involved in the trainings are perpetrators.
Huh.
And there's an example in the book where one clergy person, he was a Methodist clergy, he raped multiple women in his congregation.
Wow.
And they brought him up into a denominational trial, and the person who led the trial 2 years later was brought up on charges.
Huh. Wow.
Yeah.
So it's the ones who are the teachers are the ones that are the perpetrators. Wow.
Often.
I teach ethics often, so this is making me feel nervous about myself. And are some denominations more progressive in terms of training to keep people informed and trained on how to not participate in these
I would say the UCC is pretty good at it. I know there are probably isolated cases where it's not, but the woman in the 1980s who termed this as clergy sexual abuse, she wrote a book. Her name's Dr. Marie Fortune, and she is the UCC, United Church of Christ, and she was a driving force in her church. And I even interview a UCC minister, and he has worked with a victim of clergy sexual assault, and they have really good policies.
One might say that whenever you have religion, you're going to have this type of sexual assault because there's such a power arrangement between the clergy and those below them. And so will this always be a problem? Or
I hope not, but it's the clergy are placed on a pedestal and given an amount of trust that most professions aren't. If you don't like what your doctor says, you get a second opinion.
Sure.
But people tend to buy into what their clergy person says, and they trust that person. And that person every week has a platform to talk about, values of compassion and forgiveness and love, and people don't see them as a predator. Right.
And it seems to me that the clergy person also is someone you don't question. Like I encourage my students to question me, and we have lectures here at the college, and people will speak, and then there's Q&A afterwards, and you encourage people to question what they talked about and challenge them. Clergy, that's not always the arrangement.
No.
And so I wonder if that became more of the standard. Would that be a way of helping to eliminate this power arrangement, to say, hey, question what I say, question what I do, more critical?
Yeah, oftentimes the clergy person is looked at as the authority, the religious authority. He or she knows all. When does anybody ever know all?
Right. What a tough issue, yeah.
Yeah, so they're placed on this pedestal, and in a lot of denominations, you don't question that. You don't question the doctrine.
I mean, that's what we used to have, I think, with doctors. Don't question the doctor, do what the doctor says.
Right.
But that's changed, and perhaps I wonder if that would lead to change within the church.
I would hope so, and I would also hope talking about it to congregants and saying, this does happen, and these are the steps that you need to take, and this is the warning signs, and this is what you need to look for, because congregants don't even have any idea what's going on. And for myself, when I was abused, I was a seminarian, so I think back, well, I should have known better, but I had no idea. None whatsoever.
You had no idea that was
abuse.
Abuse?
Yes.
Interesting.
And it was 2 years after the assault ended when I was writing my master's thesis for the seminary, where I was typing a paper on something totally unrelated, and I wrote, I was a victim of clergy sexual abuse. And I kept typing, and I'm like,
did I just write that?
What was that? And I didn't even really know what it was. I'm like, isn't that what happens in the Catholic Church to little boys?
Yeah.
And so I found an article and saw, no, it can happen to adults as well.
Wow. And so what has been your most helpful in your path towards healing, I guess?
I think claiming that this is what happened and talking about it and helping others through it.
And has it talking with others who have been through it, or has it been helpful to talk to therapists? Has it drawn you away from religion or closer to religion? What?
Well, it's helpful to talk to all of the above.
Okay.
All of the above. And I'm no longer in an organized religious setting. Not for lack of trying. I tried at 4 different places and was asked to leave all 4. And at that point, after the 4th time, I thought...
Related to this issue?
Yes, yeah, related to this issue. And so I thought afterwards, I can't put myself in this position, and maybe, even though I have a master's in theology, I need to be finding some other field to work in.
Huh, interesting. So that's as a leader or a congregant?
Both.
Both. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And that was really hard because this happened right before I graduated from seminary, and it took me 13 years to go through that process because I was having kids and I'd stay home with them and go back to school and have another child. So it was a dream of 13 years building, and it's a lot to get a master's degree, and then boom, not to have any place to go.
Right, right. And so I know Muskegon has the Coordinating Churches group, and is that a group that you've been to talk to, or would you like to, or have you had connection with?
They say a prophet can't speak in their hometown.
I see.
My abuse happened here in Muskegon.
I see, so it's hard for...
So I'm not sure really how welcome I am in this community, and I also am aware of where there are abusing clergy in this community.
And so there's a worry that that all might come out.
Yeah, so I don't know. We'll see what happens, but I'm trying to target outside of the Muskegon area.
And there's work to do lots of places,
yes,
right?
Yeah.
So how will things change, you think, to have this more in the open? I mean, I suspect this has been happening for centuries.
It has, and I do the history of clergy sexual assault in the United States in my book. And it has been happening, and in the past there was no name for it. The woman was blamed. Harriet Beecher Stowe's brother, I can't remember what his name was, but he assaulted women in his congregation. And there's a case where the woman ended up destitute and poor, and her husband left her, and it's a horrible story. But now there's resources for women, and the internet makes that possible to find people who can help you.
Well, yeah, that's wonderful, and your book is a step in that direction, I suspect. Who do you think should read your book? Is it the one who's been sexually abused by a clergy member, or would it be others as well?
It's others as well, because I've written it in sections, so it really explains what clergy sexual assault is and the history of it, but it's written for the victims and survivors. There's chapters for family members and friends. There's chapters for therapists, because one of the great things I was able to do is say to the survivors what helped in therapy and what didn't. And that helps my own therapy practice, knowing what helped these women and what didn't. There's chapter for legislation, congregations and denominations, researchers, so I got it all packed in there.
Wow, yeah. Sounds like you did quite the tour de force on this issue.
Yeah, I went all out.
Wow. How long did it take you to put all this together?
Well, I worked on it for the 3 years I was working on my master's of social work, and in every single class that I had, when we would be given an assignment, I would focus on clergy sexual assault. So I did the history and the policy and therapeutic approaches to use, and the research in the research classes in my thesis. So everything was packed in there, and I'm like, what better opportunity to have PhDs and master level therapists looking at this, critiquing it, helping me see what I'm missing.
Wow.
And so it's a compilation of my graduate work.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Again, I want to kind of end by finding out if a person is suspicious that a friend has been a victim of clergy sexual assault, or a person has been him or herself, what steps should that person take towards healing, but also if it's currently still going on, what to do, or if it's gone in the past, what steps again should be taken? The
steps to take is, if you're the victim, find a really good therapist first before you report that to the church, because you're going to need somebody.
Support.
If it happens to somebody you know, to believe them, to support them. What happened to me is all my friends, boom, they were gone. I lost everything.
Were they connected to that
congregation? Oh yeah, everybody I knew pretty much was connected to that church. And my closest friends were gone.
Wow. Because they didn't believe you or didn't want to believe you, I guess.
Yeah, I'm not real sure because to
Yeah.
this day many still won't talk to me.
Wow.
So yeah, believe the person and sit with them.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't need to pry into what's going on, but just be a friend.
I see. And if you're in the Muskegon area, what resources would people have as far as who to call? As I might say therapist. I don't know where to call, who to go to. Do you have any ideas on where would
You
be
can call me if you're in the
Okay.
Muskegon area. And I do have a website, CaroylnWaterstradt.com, and
Okay.
a blog where I do a lot of blogging on clergy sexual assault and abuse and trauma.
Mhm.
And also work with women throughout the country.
Okay, yeah. So your site, you have a blog, I suppose you're targeting not just Muskegon, but
I'm
everywhere.
targeting really the world. I have people from other countries contacting me too.
Wow, yeah. Become the expert here
Yeah.
in Muskegon for the world, though. Wow,
Yeah,
that's wonderful.
The internet is really, really cool.
Amazing. Huh?
Yeah.
All right. Well, again, your book is Fighting the Good Fight, Healing and Advocacy After Clergy Sexual Assault. And where can people get the book?
You can get the book on Amazon.com or on my website, CarolynnWaterstradt.com.
Wonderful. Well, thanks for writing the book. Thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
All right, it's been enlightening.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to Timely Topics. We've been talking to Carolyne Waterstradt about her new book. And until next time, have a wonderful day.